content over everything.
Get me on my good side, like.
No shot fire.
But again?
It's always like outside on the black side of you.
The black side, yeah? There's only black sides in our DJ Riza. What are you dealing with? What other sides are there? Yeah. So I stand here in defense of what is referred to as Afrocentricity, also known as Afrocentricity, also known as the African-centered scholarship tradition. There was a conversation a few weeks ago with some Muslim brothers who were discussing the Afrocentric scholarship and its treatment of Islam, yeah, as a religion, and so they were challenging the lack of nuance, yeah, within the African-centered scholarship tradition in relation to Islam. And so today, I had a quick word with Uncle Dan Juma and said to him that I would like to continue that conversation, and he agreed. But before we was able to do it, he had to go. So brother COE asked me to address it same way anyway, so I'll touch on it right now and just say that when we deal with Afrocentric, first of all, I think it's important to properly give a definition, because I've seen a lot of comments about this, not just in Speaker's Corner, but on Facebook and other places, and it seems to be a bone of contention because our Muslim brothers and sisters don't feel like they're getting a fair shake or a fair deal when it comes to the African-centered scholarship, yeah? So, just by explaining first and foremost, the term Afrocentric is a term coined, represents two different words. One, African, and two, centered. This is why I say African-centered. And you put that together, you get Afrocentric. The term Afrocentric is actually coined by an elder by the name of Malefekete Asante and others, including Mambo Ama Mazama, and I believe that was in the 1980s. Some people use the term Afrocentric because we don't like how the term Afro has been appropriated in terms of Afro-Caribbean or, you know, other usages within Western society. And then others go further and just say African-centered for more greater definition, yeah? But the Afrocentric tradition, as the title suggests, is about placing things African in the center of our worldview, yeah? So the basic idea is that things that come out of African culture, African history, African philosophy, African spirituality represent the centrality of how we view the world. So we view the world from an African center, yeah, which is considered to be natural for African people. And what has happened is that through oppression, colonization, enslavement, African people have been decentralized from our African root. So the Afrocentric tradition is designed to re-centralize us. Now, the importance of this is that when we're talking about African-centered, the scholarship tradition under the title of Afrocentricity deals with many things, but you could boil it down to like three primary things. The first is history. The second is culture. And then you could say that those two things combine to lessons in terms of addressing the political implications of those things, yeah? So the first thing is that the African-centered historian is looking to rewrite the history of African people in ways that service African people, because our history has been written by non-Africans, yeah? We've been taught our history by non-Africans. And as a result, we've been indoctrinated into ideas that seek to misinform us about who we are, where we've come from, and therefore are incapable of developing our sense of self in terms of becoming productive members of society in today's world. That's the first thing. The second related thing is that we've been taught to degrade and be ashamed of African culture, the things that Africans has given to the world, yeah? And then based upon that, using the degradation or the negation of African history, the vilification of African culture, the oppressors, the colonizers, have developed a worldview in order that is based upon oppressing African people. So oftentimes this related to the Europeanization of African history. But it just so happened that when the African historian delves into African history and they unearth the lost aspects of African history, and the African-centered scholar delves into African culture, they learn that the relationship of Europe and Europeans in relation to African history and culture is not too dissimilar from the relationship of Arabs and Arab culture in relation to African people. And so what you find is that whereas the European came, invaded, negated African history, rejected and negated African culture, and taught us that our culture was pagan and heathen and not worthy in the sight of God, and gave us Christianity as a superior spiritual faith or a superior culture to what we already had. The African-centered historian discovered that those who came and brought us Islam did a similar thing. They brought us something that they taught us was superior to what we already had. And those of us who engaged and adopted that faith looked down upon, looked negatively upon what we already had and rejected it. And in rejecting it, we rejected our ancestors. And in rejecting our ancestors, aspects of our history was lost. And so the African-centered historian really challenges the Arabic supremacy that has been imposed upon African people. And in the context of the Arabic supremacy, we understand that the Arabic supremacy cannot be easily extricated from the imposition of Islam, the conversion to Islam, and how Islam developed among African people. So many statements are being made about the hatred for Islam being the fuel of African-centered scholars. And I wish to correct that. And I want to defend the Afrocentric scholarship tradition, because essentially what the African-centered scholarship tradition is designed to do is restore dignity and pride and validation to things African. The idea being that what is African stands and has value on its own merit. Yeah? That's it. That's all it's designed to do. So we don't need anything else to validate who and what we are, who and what our ancestors were, and the culture that they brought. And we understand that not everything that Africans brought was perfect or not in need of correction. But just like all people in their sojourn through humanity, they are allowed to develop and evolve based upon their own merit. And they are allowed to learn and adopt from other groups of people through their organic interactions with them. That Africans deserve the same honor, the same leeway to develop ourselves. And so our own history, our own culture is valid on its own merit, and that as a people throughout history, we have developed culture, civilization, nation based upon these things, and those things are good enough, and we can learn a lot from those things, yeah? And we don't need to reject those things and negate those things in honor of something else. And that's the principal aim of the African-centered scholar, the African-centered historian. And so hopefully in future, myself and my Muslim brothers and sisters will be able to continue this conversation, because there are a lot of issues. The issue of slavery and the differences and similarities between slavery brought by the Europeans and those brought by the Arabs. The differences and the similarities in terms of the impact of Christianity and the impact of Islam on African people as it relates to slavery and colonization. And these are very, very important conversations, but they're also very sensitive ones. So we want to make sure that we have the conversation with due regard and due respect. And I'll end on this point, just as an example of what we're talking about. And notice not just in the conversation that I'm referring to a few weeks ago, but in general, that when it comes to my Muslim brothers and sisters, and I say this with the utmost love and respect, that when it comes to Africans discussing the Arabic enslavement of African people and the role of Islam within that context, the first knee-jerk thing that is often done is to throw out the fact that Africans sold other Africans into slavery. And this little deflection, it seems to be a knee-jerk reaction thing. I've seen it even from videos before I started coming to the park from a few years ago. That dynamic exists. And it's as though one justifies the other, but it's also as though whatever systems of servitude existed in Africa prior to the coming of the mass conversion to Abrahamic religions was comparable to what the Arabs put us through when they came with slavery to Africa. And I don't think that claim, or even the suggestion towards that, can be correct. And so we need to have that conversation further. But most importantly, however, there are a lot of Muslim brothers and sisters who have a lot of negative things to say about people that they call Afrocentrics. And so I'm here to defend the African-centered scholarship tradition without apology, but with all love and respect. So I look forward to us having a conversation in the future, you know what I mean? I'll leave it there for now, because it's good to be able to relate to brothers and sisters and go back and forth, and you know what I mean? Have a conversation in that way, in that kind of way, have a dialogue. So I look forward to the dialogue. I'll put that out there. Next week, the week after, we'll have the dialogue, and I trust it will be fruitful. I'll close by saying, Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Most High, our Father, creator of the universe. Kudzai Muzil Mukuro, give praises unto our great ancestors.
ContentCOE everything from your melody.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
COE.
Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky Magic.
Yeah,
I don't listen to BBC.
Yes.
Man, don't listen
I think
to
that
ITV. I don't even listen to Sky Magic.
religions are born out of it. There's no religion that comes that is not born out of a culture. I think it's possible for a religion not to be born out of a culture. But I also think religion informs culture, it creates culture. You see what I'm saying?
Sorry, I'm lying. Listen to your mouth,
It's a good question. And I think this is one of the things that we're going to have to go into when we discuss with the Muslim brothers and sisters. I think that from what I understand, you ask the question, does it affect the people that are not practicing?
First I'm sharing the space to make it real fathom. Maybe I want to throw lead in my magnum. Ain't my cock.
Definitely.
My magnum.
When a group of people take that,
Yes.